And now on to rampant abuse at the NSA. The Washington Post reports on Edward Snowden's latest leak, an internal audit at the National Security Agency that reveals the spy agency breaking both internal and foreign intelligence surveillance court privacy rules thousands of times every single year. The documents cover the first quarter of 2012 and highlight an increasing number of incidents, or what the NSA calls surveillance that inappropriately reaches American citizens. Now, these incidents are blamed on either operator error or system error. Now, 1 week ago, the president held a press conference on these NSA leaks, and he made this claim about the program.
If you look at the reports, even the disclosures that Mr. Snowden's put forward, all the stories that have been written, what you're not reading about is the government actually abusing these programs. What you're hearing about is the prospect that these could be abused. Now, part of the reason they're not abused is because these checks are in place. And those abuses would be against the law and would be against the orders of the FISC.
Now, this latest revelation showing thousands of abuses each year appears to contradict the president's claims. These documented abuses occurred at the NSA's Fort Meade headquarters and other Washington area facilities. Government officials said the number of abuses would be much higher if other collection centers were included. Not only that, other documents reveal that the NSA purposely withheld information of these abuses from oversight staff. Also, the documents uncover a program out of the NSA that collected and stored both U.S. and foreign emails together for months before the FISA court was even made aware of its existence and eventually ruled it to be unconstitutional. One thing that's still uncertain is just how many Americans have been affected by these so-called incidents at the NSA. Now, for more on what can be learned from these latest leaks, I'm joined by Amy Stepanovich, Director of EPIC's Domestic Surveillance Project. Amy, thanks for coming on. So we hear of these abuses, these thousands of abuses that an internal audit at the NSA revealed. What exactly are these abuses?
As you said, many of them are human operator error, and that includes a wider range of things, from typing in the wrong target, not having enough information, down to basic typos. In one instance, we saw that an analyst typed in 202, which is the area code for Washington, D.C., instead of 20, the country code for Egypt, and ended up sucking in all sorts of phone call information for people in the Washington, D.C., United States persons in the Washington, D.C. area, when they were meant to be sucking in God knows how many calls that were taking place in Egypt.
So those of us who live in D.C. likely, as a result of this mistake, had our communications swept up and analyzed.
Well, yeah, and think about who lives in D.C. If this leak is going to be more interesting to some of the lawmakers than maybe some of the others, it's because they might have and probably were affected by it.
That's an interesting point. An unnamed official in this Washington Post article tried to defend the NSA against all these claims of abuse, and they said, you can look at it as a percentage of our total activity that occurs each day. You look at a number in absolute terms, that looks big. And when you look at it in relative terms, it looks a little different. In other words, he's basically saying, or she's basically saying, we're collecting so much data that a few thousand abuses is a relatively small amount. Is that supposed to make us feel more comfortable about the program, or actually frighten us even more?
2 points, actually, for this to be made. The first is the public version of these reports actually said the number of abuses was a small number, not a small percentage. It actually is a very large number. It was a basic math, number size is not the same as percentage size. And you're getting down to the numbers. It's 7 to 8 incidents a day, which is quite large. However, if there are many, many times they're collecting information a day, maybe that number is small in correlation, but that doesn't mean that we should be assured. That means that the NSA is collecting all sorts of information and that there's so many chances for abuse to take place. In fact, they're saying that abuses are going up from year to year, not down.
Right, it seems to open a lot more doors to questions. And they're like, oh no, this is a little small number compared to all the other stuff we're doing. As far as the oversight chain goes, these abuses, like the one you mentioned about Washington, D.C. inadvertently being swept up, officials were told to basically whitewash these, to keep them away from oversight staff. The Washington Post contacted Senator Dianne Feinstein. She's the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee in charge of overseeing these programs, and she wasn't even aware of this audit even existing until the Washington Post told her about it. So how can any of this be considered effective oversight?
Well, it's not. I mean, the basic answer is there is no effective oversight. The FISA court, there's a one-party system. They only hear one side of the argument. Congress is not effective oversight. They aren't briefed on what's going on. If they said that they could have had access to this report that they didn't know existed if they went to a specific secure room and didn't bring any staff and didn't bring any attorneys and didn't bring anything to take notes on, and then they could look at the document that they didn't know was there. This is no way oversight.
Well, staying on this issue, we've also been told that oversight's existing in the FISA court, which you just mentioned. I want to read a quote here by the FISA court chief judge. He's a U.S. District Judge Reggie B. Walton, and this is what he said. The FISC, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, is forced to rely upon the accuracy of the information that is provided to the court. The FISC does not have the capacity to investigate issues of noncompliance, and in that respect, the FISC is in the same position as any other court when it comes to enforcing government compliance with its orders. What is it about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that prevents it from being that necessary oversight?
Well, it's interesting that they say they're in the same position as a normal court, because they very likely are in the same position, but things don't play out the way that they would in a normal court. In a court, you would issue a surveillance order, be it a warrant or some other document that allows police, law enforcement to go out and conduct surveillance of an individual, and eventually that individual will be supposedly brought into court and presented with the evidence against him or her and allowed to challenge the gathering of that evidence under the Fourth Amendment, under legal and statutory standards. You never get that chance in the FISA court. You never bring somebody into court. There's never an opportunity to challenge the collection of this data. So you never take that extra step to see if the NSA's activities
So when we hear about reforms to the FISA court and the president mentions, perhaps a privacy advocate and senators calling for a privacy advocate, doesn't that reform miss the real problem with the FISA court?
It catches one of the real problems, which is that it's courts are supposed to be a two-party process. They're supposed to be adversarial, and you have one person going in and presenting an argument. There's nobody on the other side. Now, having somebody on the other side isn't going to fix that unless there's an extra piece put into place to make it a meaningful adversary. You have public reporting, you have some sort of accountability, so that person isn't just another green light to let these programs move forward and they can continue to throw up the oversight flag.
Just last question, a few seconds here. Can we rest assured that these are just operator errors creating these abuses, or might there be some intentionality here?
Well, that's funny. So they define these as non-intentional errors. None of these are intentional. But when you think about, I've put in an area code instead of a country code. Where do you cross the line from being a non-intentional error to being such gross negligence that you have to be said that you're acting intentionally or very close to it?
Yeah, well said. That was Amy Stepanovich, the director of the Domestic Surveillance Program, at EPIC.